Hello, my HS358D students. This is your Professor Donald Earl Collins. It is the start of week 10, and we are beginning our descent into the chaos as known as finals week, with about a month left in the course. We have roughly 4 weeks worth of class meetings left, with um, Thanksgiving week in the middle of that. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving week, 2 weeks after Thanksgiving week. We do not have a final exam in this class, so by that very nature, we won't be meeting after the 8th of December. That's it. Thursday, December 8th is our final class meeting. The way our schedule is right now, the way it's starting to shape up, is that we will meet virtually through Microsoft Teams tomorrow on the 8th, and then we'll meet in person on Thursday, November the 10th, and Tuesday, November the 15th. And then my plan is to have us, knock on wood regarding the in-person meets. And my plan is for us to meet virtually again on the 17th of November, and that before the Thanksgiving break. Based on what I'm thinking, we'll probably meet virtually as well on November the 29th, which is the second day after everyone gets back from Thanksgiving break. I think give people a few days to get acclimated again after being around other people for a week or parts of a week. So there's that. In our last class meetings, we will have, my guess is we'll have at least two more class meetings in person after that. One will be on Thursday, December the 1st, and another one would be on Tuesday, December the 6th. December the 8th, it just depends how many people plan on doing in-person presentations. We only have 2.5 hours of meeting per section of this course that I teach. So that's 2.5 hours. I've worked this out doing the math numerous times. The most I've ever been able to do in any 2.5 hour period for any course, in terms of in-person presentations and have folks up and down, was about 11. Um, that's the reason why it was 11 is because two or three people did 5 minute presentations. Most people will do 10. A lot of people will go over. Plus, you have to account for questions. So that's about 4 questions maximum per hour, right? Four max, right? So that's about 8, and you're still rushing it if it's 8. So, you know, I'm encouraging as many people to do video presentations of some sort or another, or a podcast, or whatever, however format they're using, that they use multimedia work to do it and not try to do it in person, unless, it lends itself to be doing it in person. Like, if you're doing ballet, right? Maybe you should do it in the classroom instead. I don't know, right? But for the most part, your presentation should be recorded. So there's that. Other news, I've already scored all of your proposals. Most of you got your proposals approved with some issues around things that you need to tweak, maybe some qualifications, maybe you need to adjust in terms of either the use of your artifact, or find a different artifact, or find the artifact a different theme for your artifact. There were cases of that, but I'd say about 80 of you, very few to no objections, 80%. Now there's another, 10, maybe 12% of you who didn't get rejected, but there were serious issues with your proposal. Some of you didn't even really write a proposal. About half a dozen of you wrote sentences or sentence fragments discussing this is what I want to do, but not really, kind of thing. And kind of on the lines of no, right? You can't do stuff outside. You can't just do, the artifact that you find from the 1970s and concentrate the 1970s forward. That's not this course. You can't do artifacts that are from late 19th, early 20th century move forward. That's not this course. This course basically runs from the period roughly between 1619 and 1865 when it comes to African diasporic people living in colonial America / the United States of America through the Civil War. That's the course, right? It's not the Civil War. It's not the Declaration of Independence. It's not the U.S. Constitution. That's not the course. It's about black people. It's called African American history. It's not about what white people thought of black people. That would not be African American history. That would be what white people think of black people history. Laughing at myself. Here we go. But my point though is that some of you turned in those kinds of things, and I had to say no because you're outside the time frame, or you're doing things that suggested that you didn't really understand the assignment, even though it takes up 2.5 pages, maybe 3 pages of the syllabus. Half the syllabus is basically describing your assignments in detail. Just so that you don't have to, mess up or not get things right or not, if you did, that's why you lost points. So there's that. There are a couple of you who have not gotten your writing assignments graded because there are other arrangements that have been made in terms of when you submitted it, how you submitted it, what grade you're getting. There are extenuating circumstances, a couple of cases. I'll hopefully have those done in the next week or so. You do not really get to complain about when I get those done, considering how long it took for me to get them. I'm not blaming you for that in a couple of cases, but it's still true that I'm a human being, and I'm not, not missiles you spin up in an act of war, nor am I a customer service representative, right? And I don't have the demeanor of one, even though I've actually done that kind of work before. I'm not particularly great at it, but I was good enough at it not bite any people's heads off. But the truth of the matter is, it's been a long time since I've done that work, and I don't expect to be treated as such, especially in some of the emails I've gotten from folks the last week. Um, just basic decency is what I ask for, right? The respect that comes with my title would be nice, right? That should be the norm. But I think so many of you are used to treating your professors like they are teachers from high school or middle school. That by the way, and those folks don't deserve disrespect either. Let's be honest. A lot of these folks have master's degrees. They certainly already have the degree that you're supposed to be earning. So at least give them that level of respect, if not just plain old decency. So I try to do that with you because you're supposed to be adults. But I get responses from people as if they're 13-year-olds who've been, taking the piss, as the British would say, right? So, you know, I want you to trust me. I want to trust you. And this is the one thing I can promise you. For those of you who take this final project seriously, get it done on time, get it done right, get it done in a way that's creative and involves independent thinking and all of that, that follows the instructions, you will do well on this. It might only be worth 45% of your total grade, but in some respects, because I'm the one grading it, I have a little bit of discretion here in terms of how your grade finally ends up, right? So it might be worth 45%, but if it's borderline, if it's between a C plus and a B minus, a D and a C, you see a C minus, an F and a D, or even a C, an A minus and an A. I will take into account what you do with this. I am, in fact, already doing so. I'm just not going through and disclosing every way the algorithm we're using to calculate your grades, right? But I am, in fact, trying to do that as part of this process because ultimately do want you to learn, come out of something in this class that you feel like, wow, I really did something here that really taught me the things I didn't really, necessarily want to know, but now that I know them, I'm glad for it. That's kind of the whole point of the course, right? Especially with it being an elective. So there's that piece that I want to make sure people understand, right? That this is not me trying to be a hard ass. This is me trying to get you to do the work you're supposed to do and to get something out of this course more than lectures and occasional discussion in film. So anyway, so I've gone over everything I'm supposed to go over except for what we're supposed to be talking about this week. And what this week is about, for those of you who cannot be in class physically in person on Thursday and for whatever reason have to miss the Microsoft Teams thing tomorrow, the week is basically about the abolitionist movement and the path toward the Civil War, the march toward war. And I'm hearing drums in my head going off, the drums of, and fife and drums of, military processions getting ready to go out in the battle and launch cannon shells at each other and so on. But in point of fact, that's what this period is. It's the antebellum period. And this is a period where, yes, most of the American population, particularly white American population, does not care, does not care about slavery and about all the things that would lead to the cause of the Civil War, but they're part and parcel of it anyway, because they have a leadership that refuses to directly deal with the issue at hand. The issue at hand is, can a country that has based itself on the lie that the American Revolution was about freedom and equality and freedom from tyranny and freedom for common people and equality and prosperity. We the people, in order to build a more perfect union type stuff. You know, all we leave these truths to be self-evident that all people are created equal type of stuff. When the point of fact, you obviously don't, because you know one out of every seven people in your population's enslaved, right? And in the South, that's more than 30% of the population. It's about a third of the population as such, right? So you don't truly believe that. And so the abolitionist movement is the spark of social justice in the United States, period. It's literally the first major social justice movement in the US, period. You know, you could say, well, what about the common man movement? Well, that's voting rights for white guys who, you know, who don't own property, right? So I guess you could, but it wasn't a movement. White guys weren't lining up, going give me votes now, kind of thing. There weren't rallies around that. There wasn't a protest movement around that. That actually, literally, naturally started happening with the new states west of the Appalachians between, say, 1790s and like the 1810s, and by the 1810s and 1820s, other states, Virginia and other states starting giving white guys without property the right to vote over the age of 21. So didn't even need to be the amendment of the Constitution, because it became normal by the 1830s for that to happen. But this is a movement, and with William Lloyd Garrison, with Harriet Beecher Stowe, with Frederick Douglass, with Sojourner Truth, with Harriet Tubman, and so many others involved, white and black. It's also a biracial movement, if you will, or multiracial movement, because it involves at least 30 different groups, including some indigenous folks or people related to indigenous folks. So when Garrison comes out in The Liberator in 1831, it pretty much coincides with Nat Turner's rebellion. And so with that kickoff, you had nowhere else to go but down and up at the same time, because Garrison was not advocating for the revolution, for the Second American Revolution, a violent revolution that would overthrow the social order and would allow the enslaved to be free, and free blacks to have citizenship rights, right? I mean, those are ultimately became the goals of the abolitionist movement, and that's not what he was seeking at first. He just wanted a voice to be out there, a voice of reason around why slavery was wrong and therefore why we needed to get rid of it. And he's just one of many examples. He's the biggest example, to be sure. But here's the thing to understand, that in terms of how this movement plays out. For one thing, as I've said over and over again, but I want to make this clear, even those who are knee deep in abolitionist movement, who have died in the war abolitionists, the majority of them believe in immigrationism. That is to say, that those blacks freed from slavery would have to leave and go to Africa. They not go back to Africa, as they kept saying to these things. It's not like they were. These are folks who are now upwards of 200, upwards of not 200 years, upwards of about 150 years removed from when their original ancestors arrived on the shores of what is now the United States. So they're not from Africa, but they are African. And so let's send these folks en masse back to Africa. But they also realize that this is this is not a practical solution for the 2+ million free and enslaved Africans, African diasporic people, black folk who are living in the United States. You have enough ships to send that many people back at once, to Africa at once? No, you don't. 20,000 or so folks end up going to Liberia in 1847, right? And several other shiploads of folks joined them over time in the years between 1847 and the 1870s. And that took time. Forget about 2 million or 4 million by the 1860s. But there was definitely a big debate among abolitionists around this. Majority of these folks were not, absolutely not, believers in black equality. They did not believe that blacks were their equal as white abolitionists. They did not believe that at all. So, um, before you say that these people weren't racist, maybe they were the least racist of the people that you would have to deal with if you were Frederick Douglass or Sojourner Truth or Henry Highland Garnet and some of these other folks. But they were not racist. They were very much racist. They very much believed in white superiority over Africans. That's to be sure, and people of African descent. But what you get with Frederick Douglass, what you get with Henry Highland Garnet, what you get with Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman and Harriet Jacobs and all these other black abolitionists and folks who can talk about their experiences about slavery is you get real live people in real time talking about what they went through. Real live people in real time talking about the horrors of slavery and why it needs to end. Real people who, in Frederick Douglass's case in particular, who are great orators, talking about the need for inclusion within the movement, talking about the need for inclusion of free blacks, need for inclusion of folks who escaped slavery, folks who can speak to why the country needs to get rid of this system. It's not only not good for those of African descent, or for black folks, it's not good for white people either because it turns them basically into narcissistic fools, right? Narcissistic elitist fools, is to, for lack of a better way of putting it, who are fooling themselves to think that they're not sullying themselves and dehumanizing themselves in the process of executing the processes of slavery. So there's that. The movement continues to grow throughout the 1840s, but then when the Compromise of 1850 comes through, that allows California to join the Union as a free state, but basically reopens the issue of slavery across territories north of the 3630 parallel, which is the border between between Arkansas and Missouri. All of a sudden, all these new territories in the west of the Mississippi theoretically could become slave states. And that's between that and the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, which put even more of a premium on individual whites basically being their own vigilantes and being able to turn in escaped slaves to courts, to law enforcement, to slave catchers, to bounty hunters to be re-enslaved, which included basically people who were free, who had their own papers being stolen, being kidnapped, and sold into slavery in the 1840s and 50s as well. As many as 50,000 people went through that in this period, anywhere between 20 and 50,000 anyway. So not good. And so that's what causes them to step up their efforts. But when you talk about the abolitionist movement, you have to talk about it in terms of what else is happening in the country as a whole. And the expansion of the country to include land west of the Mississippi, to include land west of the Rocky Mountains, to include land that used to be part of Mexico. Basically 2/3 of Mexico became part of the U.S. In the period between 1846 and 1853. You've got slave owners. You've got slave owners taking upwards of 3,000 slaves to Arizona, New Mexico territory, in an area where you can't barely grow anything, much less cotton. You've got folks taking, because Kansas is open after the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 to being either a slave state or a state where their slavery is outlawed, right? And you've got competing factions from southern states, from states north of the Mason-Dixon line, finding out of what kind of states this is going to be. They're responding to this sort of drumbeat toward war, the drumbeat toward the Civil War, right? And so there are signs. Kansas really is the biggest sign, and with it, the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 is the biggest sign. It extends the Compromise of 1850 and basically opens up every state, every territory, including states where you think that the issue of slavery would be resolved, to possibly turning, to the slave state. it's the powder keg that leads to violence, particularly. And there's this uprising, the upheaval of violence that does not. It's not just in the South, but throughout the country. Kansas is an example of it. John Brown is so incensed by the Kansas-Nebraska Act that he becomes a vigilante. Him and his black wife and his, basically his mistress, along with two of his sons, along with a whole bunch of free and enslaved enslaved blacks, goes on raids across the state of Kansas, destroying towns where they voted for slavery, destroying camps where they voted for slavery. The first, when they held the first vote for or against slavery in the state of Missouri, the state of Kansas, majority of folks who took the vote saw that, took it as, said that this state's open to slavery, to which, gunfire broke out. This went on for several years. There's a reason why it's called Bleeding Kansas, with John Brown essentially conducting terrorist raids and terrorist attacks across the state. Right. There's also the beating of Thaddeus Stevens in 1857 with a cane by Southern Democrat, over bringing up slavery and talking about how slavery needs to go and so on and so forth. There's the Dred Scott decision of 1857 where Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Justice Roger Roger Taney, excuse me, sorry about that. I always get that mixed up. But anyway, he says that to Dred Scott, who's been free essentially for 12 years, right? Or at least 10 years anyway, living in Dakota Territory, what's now Dakota Territory, telling them in so many words that, the black man has no rights to which the white man has to respect. We don't have to give you, we don't have to grant you freedom. We don't have to grant you citizenship. You don't have any rights, whether you are free or slave, as far as this federal government is concerned, right? This drumbeat is what pushes more whites who are on the fence about slavery into supporting the abolitionist movement. Now, the abolitionist movement is not the only thing that comes out of the abolitionist movement. The first wave of feminism, the women's suffrage movement, comes out of this movement too. The temperance movement, trying to create lives that are alcohol free by virtue of people either not drinking liquor or limiting how much liquor they drink so they're not drunk, in order to protect housewives and women from domestic violence and unemployment and being destitute. All comes out of this outpouring because of this, disproportionate number of folks involved in the abolitionist movement are women, particularly white women, particularly middle class white women. The Harry Beecher Stowe's of the era, to be perfectly honest. These are the same people who are working with abolitionists, white and black, to end slavery, white, black, and indigenous to end slavery. So, and so that comes out, but that's happening while the country simultaneously is moving towards civil war. And there's also the John Brown's raid of 1859. With John Brown's raid, the South is basically on red alert from that point on. It doesn't take much. All it really takes is a new party created in 1854 that tries to ride the fence on slavery versus freedom to eventually put out as a nominee someone that really upsets people to the point where people are ready to take up arms. Sounds familiar? I think about Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012. Just examples of that and the backlash that happens toward this. And Lincoln, in a lot of ways, faces a backlash in 1860 that Obama faced in 2008 and in 2012, right? And so, the response to Obama is basically Trump. Less violent than the response, obviously, to Lincoln, although, history still has time to play out in our respects. So there's that. I will stop here because there's a lot more to this than what I've done, but this should be the basis for anybody who misses class this week for understanding what we're supposed to be talking about this week, both from the textbook standpoint and from our readings and everything else. So that should do it.